Oh, then I would say without further ado, I hand over to our first speaker, our first presenter, Jake Reed from Otomon Gakuen University, who will be talking about campaign board games as a stepping stone towards our TRPGs. So, yes, okay, we can see your slides all right. The floor is yours.
Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for coming to my talk. Um, as Ole just mentioned, my name is Jake Reed, and I'll be talking about my paper, the title of which you can see displayed there. So, this presentation is meant as just a short overview of my paper's main idea, and today I will talk about the contents that are appearing on the screen now. So, what are campaign board games? How do they overlap with TRPGs? How do they diverge? And how are they a stepping stone between the two? Also, I'll put out a call for more inquiry into these types of games. So, in recent years, we've seen the rise of a new kind of tabletop experience, often called campaign board games. So, these are quite large, narrative-driven games that players cannot finish in one sitting. So I'll be talking more about these in a moment. But before that, I want to contrast them with what is just a regular board game. So board games that can be finished in one sitting are sometimes called one and dones, such as Zombicide or Dead of Winter. Both of those have players surviving in a kind of zombie apocalypse, so like The Walking Dead or something, and they are played one scenario at a time. So each of these games have a number of different scenarios in them. It's not the same every time you play it, but the scenarios are not really connected narratively. They're only connected by theme, so zombie survival. So that's why it's a one and done. They do exhibit narrativity in that each scenario is winnable by completing certain mission goals that are tied to the scenario's story. Campaign board games, on the other hand, unfold over many sessions, telling an ongoing story where players control characters who grow and develop, level up, face challenges together. So the one you see here is called Kingdom Death Monster, which was maybe one of the first ones in this genre. And then there's Aeon Trespass Odyssey, which is more recent, and Oathsworn into the Deepwood, which is also pretty recent. So these games share some of the language and structure of tabletop role-playing games. So words like campaign, character, narrative, story, these appear frequently in both TRPGs and in these games, but the games are not the same as TRPGs. There is some overlap, of course, and my paper argues that campaign board games occupy a kind of fascinating middle ground between traditional TRPGs like Dungeons and Dragons and conventional board games. Both of the formats share a focus on storytelling, character progression, and cooperative play. In both of these types of games, players make meaningful decisions that shape an unfolding narrative. So I'd like to call that narrative agency here. So, for example, in Aeon Trespass Odyssey, ATO, players command a giant city ship that you can see depicted there in their artwork. They explore a fictionalized, fantastic version of ancient Greece, in which the Olympian pantheon, so Zeus, Poseidon, Hermes, and so on, have fallen. They've fallen from Olympia. Olympia is gone. So that calls into existence, calls into question existence itself. You know, what's the purpose of our life now without the gods guiding our decisions? So in this seemingly hopeless world, the players in ATO have to make decisions about how to progress this story. So for example, early on, players have to decide whether or not to allow this mysterious princess aboard their ship. And the princess has a lot of political clout, but at the same time has powerful enemies. So she also may have, you know, ulterior motives for wanting to be on the ship that players could pick up on if they pay attention to the subtext or the narrative. And whatever decision you make, that affects later parts of the story. So just like decisions made by players affect the story that a GM is telling. We also see mechanical agency in these games, similar to tabletop role-playing games. So the players have freedom to use the game's systems to solve challenges. So in ATO, players have to learn how to combat the enemies that now threaten the land in the absence of the gods. And these enemies in the game are called primordials. They're really massive monsters, the size of, Colosseum or something like that. And the player's characters must mentally junction with immense titans, essentially piloting them to stand a fighting chance against the primordials. So they're taking ideas from Jason and the Argonauts, if you're familiar with that. You can choose as a player from a vast array of equipment to put on your Titans. So, do you want to make a tank with a lot of armor? Or do you want to fight from a distance and build ranged weapons? Or maybe you change your strategy depending on what you're battling because all of the enemies fight completely differently, and you're often asked to change your strategy. So the choices that players have, both mechanically and in the story, in the narrative, echo the agency that players have in a TRPG when deciding how to build and play their characters and carry on the plot. However, there are key differences, of course, and perhaps the largest one is the absence of a game master. So in a TRPG, a human GM, game master, improvises, narrates, and adapts to player actions. In a campaign board game, however, this role is simulated by the game system itself, usually through decks of cards, branching storybooks, sometimes, rolling on random tables, and some games even have digital apps or other companions to help out. So that means the experience of a campaign board game is more structured, more predictable, and finite. So you can't go off script the way that you might in a TRPG session. So another big difference lies in flexibility. So TRPGs really thrive on improvisation. Players can try anything that their imagination and the game system or the group allows. So, and then the GM decides what happens. In a campaign board game, on the other hand, the rules more strictly define what is and isn't possible. So you can make choices, but you cannot really step outside the game's programmed options. So sticking with ATO for my example here, you cannot ever try to tame one of the monsters or one of the primordials, get it on your team, uh, because the game rules simply don't give you the mechanics for doing that. So you either fight it and defeat it, run away from it, or it defeats you and you lose some of your titans. Um, on the other hand, in a TRPG, obviously, this picture here on the left, I really like it. Christina Daura. It shows a player thinking about how to use their powers or abilities to go on their quests. So I imagine they're going into a dungeon here and they can decide to fight the enemy and take its treasure, or maybe they even find that the trolls or ogres inhabiting the place are reasonable and you could negotiate with them. Not to say you couldn't do something like that in a campaign board game, you could, but it would have to be part of the book, part of the plot to begin with. So replayability also differs. A TRPG can theoretically continue forever with new stories and characters. Campaign board games, however, they are limited. They have a branching narrative similar to a game book. So once you finish the story, you've seen at least one of the paths that the game offers from a narrative point of view. You could try different strategies as a board game designer to mitigate that, and new expansions and stories are created for the games that have a larger fan base. But at the end of the day, you pretty much rely on that, on the game designer to create this content. However, despite these differences, I want to talk about how they're a stepping stone now. So campaign board games can serve as a bridge towards TRPGs, especially for newcomers. And that is again the main claim that I want to make today. So they provide a TRPG-like experience without requiring a skilled GM or a deep knowledge of or experience with improvisation and storytelling. So in TRPGs, a good GM has to manage narrative flow, group dynamics, and rules all at once, and there's been work done on this. This can be a tall order and can be very intimidating for beginners. So GMing is hard. To illustrate this with a personal story, I have a gamer friend who I met in Japan, and he played in several of my D&D campaigns in the past. I introduced D&D to him. He fell in love with it, and later his friends back in the UK, he moved back, asked him to run a game for them, and of course he agreed because he loves to play D&D. Later on, he messaged me and said, "Wow, GMing is way too much work. I just feel like I'm teaching a class at university." And he was not interested in pursuing that anymore. And I'm not sure how you do it, Jake. Um, Campaign board games remove that barrier by letting the system handle those responsibilities. And the players can just get together and cooperate to play against the game, essentially. So these games also usually have tutorials because they are complex systems. They can be. But they do help players get started. So ATO, Kingdom Death, and Oathsworn, all of the games I mentioned before, they all introduce players to rules gradually through play. And this structured step-by-step learning experience allows new players to feel comfortable engaging in the game without needing years of TRPG experience or a skilled GM at the table to make it a very fulfilling experience. So in that sense, campaign board games can act as a kind of training ground, perhaps, for the TRPG format. So I'd like to move on to a call for inquiry for scholars and educators in RPG studies, such as JARPS here. These games are exciting, I think, because they blend narrative, rules, and player agency in novel ways. So they invite us to answer questions like, how do players experience story when it's partially pre-written? Or how does the physicality of miniatures, cards, and maps affect immersion compared to spontaneous or emergent storytelling? I think maybe Ant, that Ole mentioned today, has a lot to say about that. And what can we learn about narrative design when there's no human storyteller at the table? Some of these questions have precedence in game books, particularly the third one. But a game book does not have quite the same material scope as existing campaign board games, at least none that I've played. And they also, game books are generally solo experiences. So, as I suggest in the paper, campaign board games, I think, deserve recognition and attention within our RPG scholarship. They're not replacements for TRPGs, but they're adjacent intermediary tools that offer accessible and engaging narrative experiences, I think, for players and in a similar way as a TRPG. So just to sum up, campaign board games combine the narrative ambition of TRPGs with the structure and accessibility of board games. And they represent a new hybrid form that's both, I think, academically interesting, but also practically useful. They give players a way to experience emergent storytelling, character growth, and shared adventure without needing a compelling human GM. And for newcomers, they can serve as a gateway into the wider TRPG hobby. For scholars, they offer us a chance to rethink how narrative mechanics and materiality interact in tabletop play. So thank you for listening, and I hope that this brief overview encourages you to see campaign board games not as simplified imitations of TRPGs, but as rich self-contained worlds in themselves. Of course, they borrow from TRPGs and can also serve as as an inroads towards full participation. So any opportunity I have to show off my game table, I do so. So on the left, you can see the table with ATO, mid-campaign, and cycle one on it. That's the first chapter. So yes, the game and the table both take up a lot of space, but even if you live in Japan in a tiny home like me, it is possible. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you. I think we have the first question here. We have also one question on Discord, but maybe Catherine, you can go first.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. First, I would really want to get in contact and maybe into a discussion later, because I am working at the moment with on the one lab with a focus on TTRPG, and my colleague has a focus on tabletop and board games, and we still try to get to get a connection. and it looks like you are our connection. And so maybe we could have a talk later together. And the other thing is that I really think that what you mentioned, it's a good start to get into TTRPG, because you don't have to perform so good as a GM, and also because with a lot of material, you don't have to imagine all those things. So this is like a stepping stone into the hobby. But I also would want to recommend games that are TTRPGs but are GM less, and share all those heavy burdens you have to perform as a game master, or however you want to call this. And so there are also other games that provide an easy entrance. And maybe I think it would also be a good thing to compare those stepping stones, and maybe also to see how this leads to maybe different kinds of leading a game afterwards. So this would be my points, and maybe there will be more later. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the commentary there, Katrine. And nice to meet you as well. I'd love to get in touch with you. So I think my email's listed on the paper itself. Is that true, Ole? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so then
Yeah.
you can just email me anytime, and I check it all the time. So I should reply in short order. Yeah, you bring up, GM-less systems. There's a lot of stuff out there. Campaign board games are definitely not the only game in the room, so to speak. Um, and one of the big limitations of these campaign board games is they're quite expensive. They're filled with miniatures, they're filled with tons and tons of cards, books. You can go all in and get like the hardcover stuff and the neoprene mats and things. But yeah, it's quite pricey. I think ATO was maybe 200 or 300 euro when they first released it. And that's a lot of content. I still haven't finished even half of it. But it's something you have to like get together with your friends maybe, and kind of say, hey, we're gonna be a group together. Let's all pitch in a bit. And then maybe it's doable. Or if you have a research fund at a university, maybe you can do that and then use it as part of your in Unibon or something. It could work out. But yeah, they are expensive, but I think they're really good tools.
Okay, we have two comments on Discord. One is about that Japanese language TRPGs offer a lot of guidance for GMs. So maybe that is something one can look into. And the other question is just one word: Hero Quest.
Hi, Mark. Yeah, Hero Quest. Absolutely. Why not? It's it's one that I've never played it personally, but I've seen it played online, and I think it's also a compelling kind of gateway game to get into TRPGs. Or, a lot of people just stop there. They just say, well, this is what I want to do. Like, I'm not into the role playing at all. I just want to play the game and do, war gamers, for example. But people that are interested in TRPGs, I think it is a good setup. And Fuji Bayashi-san, so the GMing is hard thing. So there's this, I think it's called the critical role effect. I don't know who came up with that, but if you're familiar, Critical Role is the kind of YouTube series of Dungeons and Dragons where, it really took off. And the GM the GMs, there's several of them. They're professional actors, professional voice actors, and they have like tons of money and this massive studio now. And I haven't seen the recent stuff, but I know people really like it, even including, people that don't even know anything about D&D. Maybe they even watch it. But a lot of people look at that and they're like, "Whoa, I can't do that. There's no way I could GM like Matt Mercer. And I tell people like that, like, look, man, that's not the only way to play tabletop. You know, if you and your friends are having fun, if you're making a story that everyone is involved in, and you're making everyone at the table, you know, involved, and they have agency, then you're doing what you're supposed to do. You don't have to have a massive studio, and you don't need all this stuff. Um, but yeah, having tips and like the GM's guide, the Dungeon Master's guide, it's all about that, right? It's all about how to GM, and it gives you guidelines and rules. So there is stuff like that available, but it doesn't, it doesn't help everyone, right? Because it requires practice, right? I can't just read a book and now I'm a good GM. Like I have to actually do it. I have to figure out what works for my group, because maybe I'm a great GM for my group, but I invite some new people and they're like, "Who's this guy? This isn't what I think the role playing is," right? So it's a really dynamic thing, and it requires a lot of uh, adjustments kind of on the fly. So I hope that answers your question.
Um, There are more questions and comments in the Discord, but we have roughly 5 minutes left, and I would favor now the people who raise their hands. So Eddie, please go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. You were talking about using campaign board games as a stepping stone into TRPG. Um, in the light of accessibility, where would you put campaign board games, like in the chain of getting into a tabletop RPG? Like more in the beginning, or more in the phase where you like try out different things after that you played a session or something?
I would say that before you do a campaign board game, probably even just a regular board game would be a better start, right? So just play chess or something. Play, categories. Just figure out like, play a game that has drafting in it, or then move up to play a game that has, miniature movement, and then eventually you're going to get to campaign board games. But it does require a bit of buy-in, like because the theme of these campaign board games tends to be kind of fantasy, dark fantasy, gritty. ATO is ancient Greece, so it's a bit different than the kind of standard fantasy tropes that you see. Um, but if someone's interested in that, right, then I think campaign board games are a good place to go, but maybe not right away. Some other basic board games first to get a handle on simple mechanics. Is that what you were asking, Eddie?
No, like more like in the way of getting people into the hobby. Like when for example, if I were like to get a friend group of mine to the RPG, um, what part of that journey would I introduce campaign board games?
Okay, so assuming you have a group of friends that you want to play a TRPG, but maybe they've never done it before. They're just kind of, and maybe they're interested in that and going down that road. Then if you're already at that stage, you've got people ready and they're interested in the topic, then yeah, you could do a campaign board game. I would say something like Oathsworn is a really good starting point, because you don't even have to build a character in that. They have like 10 characters or so that are pre-made, and they have stories and backgrounds, and it's got very delineated phases in it. So you start out with a story phase, you lay out this map and you're moving around the city, and you have to make decisions of which part of the city you're going to go to. And then you kind of read through like a game book sort of experience. So you, as the kind of the group organizer, might read that out to them. And then everyone is really involved that way. And then they can see like, oh, so if this were a TRPG, then Eddie would just be making the story up, or he would have prepared something himself. In this case, it's already made, it's set, and it kind of like helps you as a GM as well, because it's kind of like you're running the game, but you didn't have to prepare the session. So, so in that way, it can kind of help a GM as well. I would say Oathsworn is a really good one to start with.
Okay. Thank you all very much. The conversation has already moved in parts to Discord with more comments and questions. Also about the difference between different types of TRPGs. Thank you, Jake. Please continue on Discord there while also listening a little bit here.
Yeah, cheers. I'll definitely read the Discord. I see it there now, and I'll reply to people as I get to them. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, thank you too. And just to briefly mention, as it was raised several times, game books have been the topic of JARPS 2 years ago. So if anyone doesn't know, please check it out.